When I saw my husband flipping through my phone, my heart skipped a beat, but not from the fear of being caught. No, it was because of the messages he was about to find. The ones I had forgotten to delete. I tried to snatch the phone from his hands, but he skillfully pulled it back and continued reading. I watched his face change as he read line after line, and I felt my life crumble in a matter of seconds. Yes, he was about to learn the truth. But not the whole truth. His hands trembled as he flipped through, and I knew he was about to reach that one message, the one that would destroy everything. The one that would either explain everything or make it even more confusing. My phone suddenly vibrated in his hands, and a new notification appeared on the screen. I saw his face pale as he read the sender's name. My husband froze. He didn't even blink. I bit the inside of my cheek, a nervous habit I have when I'm anxious. My nerves mixed with the horror of realizing what I had done. His breathing quickened. I could hear it even from the 2 meters between us. This was exactly what I feared the most. Because 3 months ago, I made a mistake, the mistake that changed everything, and now. I didn't know what to do, but let me tell you how it all started. Before I share with you the secret I've tried so hard to keep hidden, leave a comment telling me where you're watching this from and answer this question. Have you ever had a secret that you tried to hide with everything you had, but in the end, you just couldn't? It had been a long, silent night, the kind where I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, unable to fall asleep. My thoughts were like a whirlwind, spinning faster and faster, always returning to the same point. To him. To my husband. The man I married years ago, the one who had become more of a stranger to me with each passing day. I could hear the quiet hum of the clock ticking on the wall, the soft rustle of the sheets, the distant sound of traffic on the street below. Everything was so familiar, yet so distant. Like I was living someone else's life. We had been together for over 20 years. And yet, lately, it felt like we were just two people occupying the same space, sharing the same house, but not really sharing anything else. He was always away on business trips, and when he was home, it was like we were living parallel lives, his, full of meetings and obligations, and mine, filled with silence and waiting. I couldn't even remember the last time we had a real conversation. Not about feelings, not about our past, not about anything that truly mattered. Everything was about the routine, what needed to be done, what was expected. His life was full of people, and my life was full of waiting for him to come home, only to find that he was too tired or too busy to really connect. The nights were the hardest. The bed that we shared felt so empty, even though he was right beside me. I could feel the cold space between us, a gap that seemed to widen with each passing day. The silence was suffocating. I wanted to scream, to shake him awake and tell him everything that was on my mind, but I couldn't. The words caught in my throat. What was the point? Would he even listen? Would it even matter? And so, I stayed quiet. Silent in my frustration, silent in my longing, as if somehow silence would make the hurt go away. I'd been thinking about this for weeks, maybe months. The feeling of emptiness that had crept into my life, stealing away the passion, the connection, the love. And yet, despite it all, I hadn't been able to change anything. I told myself it was just a phase, that things would get better when he returned, that maybe he just needed time to adjust. But the truth was, I wasn't sure anymore. I wasn't sure that I could keep pretending that everything was fine. Then came that day. It had started off like any other day. The same routine. The same chores. I was at home, going through the motions, when the doorbell rang. It was a surprise, because I wasn't expecting anyone. I walked to the door and opened it to find my father-in-law standing there. He looked older, his face lined with the years of life he had lived, but there was something about him that was different, something that caught my attention. Maybe it was the way he looked at me, the way his eyes lingered just a little too long. Or maybe it was the way he seemed to understand the unspoken tension in the room, the kind that had been building up for so long between my husband and me. We talked for a while. Small talk. He asked how I was doing, and I gave him the usual answers. But there was something about him that made me feel seen. In a way that my husband hadn't seen me in years. He asked how I was handling everything, and for the first time in a long while, I found myself opening up. I told him about the loneliness, about the silence that filled the house when my husband wasn't there. He listened without judgment, nodding, his expression softening as he seemed to understand exactly what I was going through. It was strange, to speak like that, to admit the truth of what had been happening inside me for so long. But with him, it felt safe. He didn't rush to fix things or offer empty reassurances. He just listened, and for once, I didn't feel so alone. As the conversation came to an end, I realized I had been talking for hours. The house had grown quiet again, and it was only when he stood up to leave that I felt the weight of the moment settle in. He said he hoped I would be okay, and I smiled, nodding in agreement. But inside, something had shifted. I wasn't sure what it was yet, but I knew that our conversation had sparked something in me, something I hadn't felt in a long time. The next few days passed without much change. My husband was still gone, and I was still stuck in the same old routine. But the feeling of restlessness, of yearning, of longing, had deepened. I began to question everything, my marriage, my choices, my life. And I couldn't ignore the pull I felt toward my father-in-law. There was something about him, something that made me feel alive in a way I hadn't felt in years. I tried to shake the thought from my mind, but it wouldn't go away. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that I was living a life I didn't recognize anymore. And I didn't know how to fix it. I didn't know how to go back to the way things were. Then, one evening, when my husband was still away, I found myself standing at the door to my father-in-law's house again, unsure of what I was doing but unable to stop myself. The door opened, and there he was, standing in front of me, a quiet understanding in his eyes. Without a word, he stepped aside to let me in, and in that moment, I knew that everything was about to change. The house felt colder the moment I stepped inside. The warmth I had felt just moments ago, standing on the threshold, had already started to fade. My heart was pounding louder than it should have been, and I could feel my palms grow clammy as I stood there, unsure of what to say or do next. His house, though not particularly large, felt different somehow. It felt more alive, more present than my own. The small details around the room, the family photos on the walls, the worn leather chair by the window, seemed to carry weight, memories suspended in the air, reminding me of how far removed I felt from my own home. It was funny how a simple change in surroundings could make you feel like an outsider in your own life. "Would you like some coffee?" he asked, his voice steady, calm, as though there was nothing unusual about this situation. I nodded, unsure of what else to say. He moved with purpose, heading to the kitchen, his movements almost graceful. The sound of the kettle boiling echoed through the room, breaking the silence between us. My eyes roamed around the space, resting on the bookshelves, the small but cozy furniture, and I felt a strange sense of connection to it all. Everything seemed so well cared for. It reminded me of how neglected everything at home felt, how my own life had become a series of tasks and routines that didn't truly bring me any fulfillment. I could hear him moving about in the kitchen, the soft clink of porcelain as he set 2 cups on the table. When he returned, he didn't sit across from me. Instead, he sat next to me on the couch. His presence was comforting, yet somehow unsettling. It wasn't just his proximity, it was the way he seemed to read me, to understand everything I wasn't saying. For a moment, we sat in silence. The steam from our coffee curled up between us, and I could feel my body tense with every breath. There were so many things I wanted to say, so many questions I had for him, but I couldn't bring myself to ask. What would I say? How could I explain everything that had been building up inside me for months? Could he understand? I know this isn't easy for you, he said, his voice low, almost like a whisper. I turned my head slightly, surprised that he would acknowledge the weight of the moment. But you don't have to carry this alone. I swallowed hard. The words felt too heavy to speak. What could I say? That I was lonely? That I was drowning in a marriage that had lost its meaning? That I had spent years hoping things would get better, only to watch them slowly slip further and further away? You've always been a good listener, I finally managed to say. It was the only thing I could think of, the only thing that felt remotely safe to say in that moment. He smiled slightly, his eyes softening. I've learned to listen more than speak, he replied, his gaze never leaving mine. The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable. It was more like a quiet understanding between us, something unspoken, but felt deeply. I didn't know how much time passed, but eventually, I found myself telling him everything. Not in a clear, organized way, but in pieces, fragments of my thoughts, my frustrations, my longing for something more. For a connection, for a spark, for anything that would make me feel alive again. I just feel invisible sometimes, I said, my voice trembling. Like I'm just there. And I'm not sure how to fix it. I've tried, but nothing ever changes. He listened quietly, nodding along, his expression steady but not indifferent. His presence seemed to offer a kind of reassurance I hadn't realized I needed. It wasn't just his attention, it was his understanding. He wasn't trying to offer me advice or solutions. He was just there. When I finished, there was a silence again, but this time it felt less heavy. Like I had taken a weight off my chest, just by speaking the words I had been keeping inside for so long. You're not invisible, he said quietly. But I understand why you feel that way. Sometimes, we just need someone to see us for who we really are. I could feel a knot in my chest loosen at his words, and yet there was a strange, uncomfortable tension building. It wasn't just the words themselves, it was the way he said them, as if he truly understood what I was going through. He wasn't just sympathizing, he was empathizing. Thank you, I whispered, though I wasn't sure what I was thanking him for. For listening? For understanding? Or for giving me a glimpse of something I didn't know I was missing? As the evening wore on, we talked more, but the conversation shifted. It was no longer about the emptiness I felt or the longing I had. It was more casual now, about old memories and family stories. But every now and then, his gaze would shift back to me, lingering just a little longer than it should, and I could feel the weight of it pressing on me, stirring something inside. By the time I left, I wasn't sure what I was feeling. I wasn't sure what had just happened, or what would happen next. But as I stepped out of his house and back into the cool night air, I realized something. I didn't feel empty anymore. For the first time in a long while, I felt seen. I felt understood. But that feeling came with a price. The more I thought about it, the more I realized how much I had been craving this connection, this understanding. And I couldn't deny that the feelings I had for him had grown deeper than I had ever intended. I shook my head, trying to clear my thoughts, but I knew, deep down, that things had changed. I didn't know how, or when, but they had. I was standing at the edge of something, and I wasn't sure if I was ready to jump, or if I ever would be. The following days passed in a blur. I went through the motions, pretending that everything was normal, but inside, I was drowning in the weight of what had happened. I tried to convince myself that it was just a fleeting moment, something I could brush off. But every time I closed my eyes, every time I tried to sleep, the image of him sitting next to me, his words filling the space between us, would come rushing back. I couldn't stop thinking about that evening. About how he had listened to me without judgment, how his presence had made me feel seen in a way that my husband no longer did. It wasn't just about the conversation we had, it was the quiet understanding that had passed between us, the shared moment where I didn't have to pretend, where I didn't have to hide my true feelings. I didn't tell anyone what had happened. I couldn't. My husband would never understand, and I wasn't even sure I understood myself. The guilt gnawed at me, eating away at any clarity I had, but the pull toward him was undeniable. I had spent years trying to feel something, anything, in my marriage, but now, I felt something I hadn't in a long time, a connection, a spark. It wasn't just the attention he gave me, it was the way he made me feel important, like I mattered. The house felt colder after that night. When I would pass my husband in the hallway or sit down to dinner, it was as if we were strangers. He didn't know what I was feeling, and I didn't know how to bridge the gap between us. I had tried to talk to him before, tried to tell him how I felt, but he never seemed to hear me. Now, it felt too late. We were too far gone. The weight of it all was unbearable. I could feel myself withdrawing further into myself, unable to share my thoughts, my fears, or my desires. And then, out of nowhere, the phone call came. I was sitting at the kitchen table, absent-mindedly flipping through a magazine when my phone buzzed. I glanced at the screen and saw his name, my father-in-law. For a moment, I hesitated. My heart raced, but I couldn't ignore the feeling of needing to hear his voice again, of needing that connection. I picked up the phone, my breath catching in my throat. "Hello? Are you okay?" His voice was calm, but there was an underlying concern that made my chest tighten. I hadn't realized how much I needed to hear those words until he spoke them. "I'm fine," I said, trying to sound convincing. But even to myself, I could hear the cracks in my voice. "You don't sound fine," he replied, his tone soft but firm. "I've been thinking about you. You seemed distant the other day. I just want to make sure you're all right." I didn't know how to respond. How could I tell him that I wasn't all right? How could I admit that everything in my life was unraveling, that I was questioning everything I thought I knew? I'm tired," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know what I'm doing anymore." There was a pause on the other end of the line. I could hear him breathing, steady and calm, as if he were trying to give me space to say more. "You don't have to figure it out alone," he said quietly. "I'm here for you. Whenever you need someone to talk to." The words were simple, but they carried so much weight. I had been craving this, someone who cared, someone who wanted to listen. I felt a wave of emotion wash over me, and for a moment, I allowed myself to let go, to acknowledge that I wasn't okay. But I quickly suppressed the feeling, not wanting to burden him with my problems. "Thanks," I said, swallowing hard. "I appreciate it." After a few more minutes of small talk, I hung up, my hands trembling. The phone call had left me more unsettled than before. I knew I shouldn't be having these feelings, that it was wrong to lean on him like this. But I couldn't stop myself. His presence, his understanding, it was something I had been missing for so long. And now, it felt like I was reaching for something I shouldn't have. The guilt was overwhelming, but the emptiness I had been feeling for so long was slowly being filled by something else. A connection. A spark. And I couldn't help but wonder if this was what I had been searching for all these years, or if it was simply a dangerous distraction from the truth. Days turned into weeks, and I found myself increasingly drawn to him. I would tell myself that it was just a temporary lapse, that I was only seeking someone to talk to, but deep down, I knew it was more than that. The more I spoke with him, the more I began to realize how much I had been missing in my own life. And the more I saw him, the more I felt myself slipping further away from the life I had known. One afternoon, I found myself standing outside his house again, unsure of how I had ended up there. It wasn't planned. I hadn't told him I was coming. But I couldn't ignore the pull anymore. The need to see him, to talk to him, was overwhelming. I knocked on the door, my heart pounding in my chest. The moment he opened it, I felt a rush of warmth flood over me. Without saying a word, he stepped aside to let me in. And for the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe. We didn't speak right away. We didn't need to. There was an understanding between us now, an unspoken bond that had grown stronger with each passing day. We sat together in the living room, the quiet stretching between us. I could feel his presence beside me, steady and comforting. And for the first time in a long time, I allowed myself to feel safe. I couldn't ignore the way my heart raced whenever he was near, the way my body responded to his presence. It wasn't just about the physical attraction, it was something deeper, something I hadn't realized I was missing until now. I was standing at the edge of something, and I knew I had to make a choice. The longer I stayed here, the harder it would be to turn back. But a part of me didn't want to turn back. A part of me wanted to lean into this connection, to see where it would take me, no matter the consequences. The silence between us stretched on, and I could feel the weight of my decision pressing down on me. The path ahead was unclear, but one thing was certain, I was no longer the person I had been before. And with that realization came a sense of both relief and fear. The journey I had started was only just beginning, and I didn't know where it would lead. But I knew that whatever happened, I could no longer pretend to be someone I wasn't. The days blurred together after that afternoon, and I couldn't seem to make sense of anything anymore. I thought I could handle it, that it would pass, but the truth was, I couldn't stop thinking about him. The way he made me feel, the way his presence settled the restlessness inside me, there was no denying that something had shifted between us. And no matter how hard I tried to rationalize it, I knew I was crossing a line. I spent the next few days replaying the events in my mind, trying to figure out what exactly had happened. It wasn't as if I had planned any of it. I didn't wake up one morning and think to myself, today, I'll seek comfort in my father-in-law's eyes. But somewhere between the loneliness I felt and the kindness he offered, I had allowed myself to step too close. I had let myself feel something that I should never have felt. It was like a slow burn. At first, it was just a flicker of attraction, innocent enough, or so I told myself. Then, it grew stronger, more intense, until I could no longer pretend it was nothing. I kept telling myself that it was all in my head, that I was just looking for someone to listen, someone to understand the emptiness I felt. But in reality, I knew it was more than that. I wanted him. I wanted everything he was offering. I tried to shake the thought off, but it clung to me like a shadow, following me wherever I went. Every time I saw him, it became harder to ignore the way he looked at me, the way he seemed to understand exactly what I was feeling, even when I wasn't saying anything. There was a connection between us, one that was difficult to ignore, and every moment I spent in his presence only deepened it. It wasn't just the conversation that had changed me, it was the way he made me feel like I mattered. In a world where I had spent years feeling invisible to my own husband, here was someone who seemed to truly see me. He didn't just hear my words, he understood my silence. And that, more than anything, made it impossible to walk away. But there were consequences. I knew that. I couldn't pretend I didn't. The guilt was starting to eat at me, festering beneath the surface. I couldn't ignore what I had done, what I was continuing to do. And yet, every time I tried to pull away, to push him out of my mind, I found myself drawn back in. It wasn't even about him, really. It was about me. It was about how I had become so lost, so disconnected from the person I once was. I had spent years trying to keep everything together, trying to maintain the facade of a perfect marriage. But inside, I was breaking. And I didn't know how to fix it. It was a Wednesday when I found myself standing at his door again. I hadn't planned it. I had told myself I wouldn't go. I had promised myself I would stay away, but my feet betrayed me, and before I knew it, I was knocking on his door. When he opened it, there was no surprise in his eyes. It was as if he had been expecting me, even though I hadn't said a word about coming. He stepped aside without a word, and I walked in, feeling that familiar pull between us. The tension in the room was palpable, but this time it was different. There was an understanding now, a shared awareness of what had been happening between us. "I wasn't sure if you were going to come," he said, his voice low, almost hesitant. It wasn't like him to be uncertain, but I could hear the quiet concern beneath his words. "I didn't know if I should," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know what's happening with me." He looked at me for a long moment, as if weighing my words. His eyes softened, and he took a step closer to me, but he didn't reach for me. He didn't have to. His presence was enough. "You don't have to have all the answers," he said quietly. "You're not alone in this." Those words, simple as they were, settled over me like a blanket, offering a kind of comfort I had never felt before. It wasn't just that he was here. It was that he wasn't trying to fix me, wasn't telling me what I needed to do. He was just there, present, without judgment, without expectation. I felt my chest tighten. I wanted to cry. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run away from all of this, but I couldn't. I didn't want to. The truth was, I was beginning to care for him in a way I couldn't control. And that terrified me. He stepped closer, his hand brushing against mine. The simple touch sent a jolt of electricity through my body. It wasn't sexual, not exactly. It was more than that. It was a silent acknowledgement of everything that had passed between us, a recognition of the bond that had formed. It was impossible to ignore, impossible to deny. "I didn't mean for this to happen," I whispered, my voice breaking. "I never wanted to hurt anyone. I never wanted any of this to go this far." He didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached out, gently cupping my face with his hand. His thumb brushed against my cheek, and I closed my eyes, savoring the sensation. It was so simple, so gentle, but it felt like a lifeline in the midst of the storm I had created in my own life. "You're not the only one who's been lost," he said softly. "And you're not the only one who's been hiding. But it doesn't have to be this way. We don't have to be afraid of what we're feeling." I looked up at him, my heart hammering in my chest. I wanted to say so much, but the words caught in my throat. The truth was, I didn't know what I wanted anymore. All I knew was that in this moment, with him standing so close, I felt seen. I felt understood. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel so alone. The room seemed to close in around us, the space between us shrinking until there was nothing left but the weight of what we had shared. I could feel his breath on my skin, and I could feel the pull between us growing stronger with every passing second. I didn't know what would happen next. I didn't know what this would mean for either of us. But in that moment, I knew one thing: I could no longer pretend I didn't want this connection. I couldn't pretend that the loneliness I had been drowning in was something I could just ignore anymore. And maybe, just maybe, this was the only way forward. The days that followed that afternoon were a blur. I wasn't sure what I was doing, what I wanted, or how I could feel so lost in the midst of everything. I kept telling myself I should walk away, that I had crossed a line I couldn't uncross, but the pull was undeniable. Each time I closed my eyes, each time I allowed myself a moment of quiet, I could still feel the tension in the air from our last conversation, the weight of his touch still lingering on my skin. It was as if a door had been opened that I couldn't close. And for the first time in years, I felt alive. It wasn't about lust, it wasn't about anything physical, not exactly. It was something deeper, something I had been missing for so long. Connection. Understanding. The kind of connection I hadn't even realized I was yearning for. I had spent years in a marriage that had become stagnant, a relationship that had lost its spark long before I'd even noticed. I had convinced myself that it was fine, that it was just a phase, that everything would go back to normal. But it never did. My husband and I had drifted apart, and no matter how much I tried to bridge the gap, the silence between us grew louder. Now, here I was, standing on the precipice of something I couldn't explain, something I didn't understand but couldn't ignore. I tried to focus on other things, to distract myself from what was happening. But every time I picked up the phone or glanced at the clock, I found myself thinking of him. Of my father-in-law. The man who had somehow become everything I had been missing, even if I hadn't realized it until now. I could still hear his voice in my head, his words echoing through my thoughts. "You don't have to carry this alone." Those simple words, so full of meaning, had struck a chord in me. They made me feel seen, heard, for the first time in what felt like forever. I didn't know what to do with that feeling. I didn't know what to do with the emotions that had started to unravel inside of me. I had spent so much time keeping everything in, keeping up appearances, pretending that everything was fine. But it wasn't. And now, I couldn't ignore it anymore. The phone rang, breaking my reverie. I picked it up, already knowing who it was. "Hello?" My voice was shaky, even to my own ears. "Hey," he said, his tone warm but hesitant. "How are you doing?" The question seemed simple enough, but I felt a lump form in my throat. How was I doing? I didn't know. I hadn't even allowed myself to think about it. I had been so focused on surviving the day-to-day that I hadn't even taken a moment to check in with myself. I don't know, I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. "I'm not sure what's happening anymore." There was a pause on the other end of the line, a moment of silence that felt heavy. Then, he spoke again, his words steady but full of concern. "You don't have to have all the answers right now. You just have to take it one step at a time. I'm here for you, you know that, right?" I closed my eyes, letting his words wash over me. I wasn't sure if I was ready to hear them, but I couldn't deny how much I needed them. I had spent so long feeling invisible, feeling as though no one truly cared, that hearing those words made something shift inside of me. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I wasn't alone. "I know," I whispered, though the words felt inadequate. "I just don't know what to do." "You don't have to know," he said softly. "We'll figure it out together." And just like that, the walls I had spent years building up around myself began to crumble. I wanted to deny it. I wanted to push him away and tell myself that everything would be fine, that I was being irrational. But deep down, I knew this was more than just a passing feeling. It was more than just a conversation or a moment of weakness. It was a connection, one that I couldn't ignore. I had always prided myself on being strong, on being independent. But in that moment, I realized how desperately I had been craving someone to lean on, someone to hold me, even if it was just for a moment. Someone who could see me for who I really was, beyond the surface, beyond the roles I had been playing for so long. "Thank you," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "I don't know what I would do without you." "You don't have to worry about that," he replied gently. "I'm not going anywhere." I hung up the phone, feeling a strange sense of peace wash over me. It wasn't like everything had been fixed. I wasn't suddenly free of the guilt, the confusion, the fear. But for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel completely lost. I felt like maybe, just maybe, I wasn't as alone as I thought. The next few days passed in a haze. My husband came home for a brief visit, but we barely spoke. It wasn't that we were actively avoiding each other, it was more that we had nothing left to say. The silence between us had become so familiar that I didn't even know how to break it anymore. The distance between us was palpable, like a chasm that had opened up and was slowly swallowing everything in its path. I could feel the tension building, the weight of the unspoken words hanging between us. I knew that he could sense something was wrong, but he didn't know what it was. He didn't know that it wasn't just about him, or about our marriage. It was about me, about how I had lost myself somewhere along the way, how I had been drowning in my own emptiness. But I didn't know how to fix it. I didn't know if I could. And then, one evening, my father-in-law called again. This time, his voice was different, more urgent, more serious. "I need to talk to you," he said. "Can you meet me tomorrow? We need to figure this out." My heart skipped a beat. I didn't know what he meant, but I knew that this was the moment I had been dreading. I had been hoping that things would just work themselves out, that the tension would dissipate on its own. But I knew, deep down, that it wasn't going to. "Of course," I said, my voice steady despite the anxiety bubbling inside me. "I'll be there." I hung up the phone and sat there for a moment, staring at the screen. I didn't know what would happen next, but I knew that I couldn't avoid it anymore. Whatever it was that had been building between us, whatever it was that had started as something so small, was about to come to a head. And I wasn't sure if I was ready for it. The morning of our meeting arrived far too quickly. The night before, I had tossed and turned, unable to calm my racing thoughts. What would he say? What was this conversation going to be about? There was a feeling of inevitability hanging in the air, as if this meeting was something I had been avoiding but now had no choice but to face. I spent the morning trying to prepare myself. My hands shook as I sipped my coffee, trying to hold on to some sense of control, but it was futile. The weight of the decision I was about to make pressed heavily on my chest. It felt like every step I took was leading me closer to something I couldn't undo, something I wasn't ready to face. I dressed carefully, hoping to appear as calm and composed as I could. I knew he would see right through me, but I couldn't show him the fear I felt inside. There was no turning back now. I grabbed my keys, took a deep breath, and stepped out of the house. As I drove, I replayed the last few days in my mind, the phone calls, the subtle exchanges, the moments that had drawn me closer to him. Every interaction felt like another thread tying me to him, weaving an invisible bond that I couldn't ignore. I had tried to stop, tried to pretend it wasn't happening, but deep down, I knew it had already crossed a line. And now, it seemed as if this was the moment that everything would come crashing down. When I pulled up in front of his house, I hesitated for a moment, staring at the door as if it were a barrier to everything I feared. I wanted to turn around, to drive away, to pretend that none of this had ever happened. But I knew I couldn't do that. Not anymore. I walked up to the door and knocked. My heart was in my throat, but I forced myself to stand tall. He opened the door before I could even raise my hand to knock again. His face softened when he saw me, but there was something unreadable in his eyes, a subtle sadness that made my chest tighten. "You came," he said simply. I nodded, my voice caught in my throat. I didn't know what else to do. He stepped aside, and I entered, feeling the familiar pull of his presence. This was the moment I had been dreading. I knew it. But it was too late to turn back now. We sat down in the living room, the same room where we had talked the other night. The air was thick with unspoken words, the tension between us palpable. He didn't speak right away, and I couldn't bring myself to say anything either. We were both waiting for something, an opening, a cue, something to break the silence. Finally, he spoke. "I've been thinking a lot about our conversations, about what's been happening between us." His voice was steady, but there was an edge to it that I hadn't noticed before. I nodded, my hands clenched tightly in my lap. "I don't know what's happening either," I said, my voice shaking despite my best efforts to sound calm. "I never meant for any of this to happen." He looked at me for a long time, his gaze searching, as if trying to understand the depth of what I was feeling. I couldn't meet his eyes. I didn't want to. The guilt was overwhelming, and I felt like it was written all over my face. You don't have to explain yourself, he said quietly. But we both know this can't go on. His words hit me like a punch. I had been avoiding that truth, pretending that everything would just work itself out. But I knew deep down that it wouldn't. I couldn't keep living in this limbo, torn between the life I had with my husband and the emotions that had slowly taken root in me. The connection I had with him, with my father-in-law, was undeniable. But it was wrong. So wrong. And I knew that now. I don't want to hurt anyone, I whispered, my voice barely audible. But I don't know how to make it stop. I don't know how to let go of what's happening. He sighed, leaning back in his chair. Neither do I. But I can't keep pretending that nothing has changed. It has. And we both know it. The truth of his words hit me like a wave. I had been pretending, not just to my husband, but to myself. I had been hiding from the reality of what I was feeling. But there was no hiding anymore. No turning back. I'm sorry, I said, the words tumbling out before I could stop them. I never wanted this. I never wanted to hurt anyone. He shook his head slowly, his eyes softening. You don't have to apologize. We're both responsible for this. We've both made choices. But now, we have to face them. I wanted to scream, to argue, to deny it all. But deep down, I knew he was right. We had both allowed this to happen. We had both crossed a line, and now we were stuck on the other side, with nowhere to go but forward. I don't know what to do, I whispered, my voice trembling. He reached across the table, placing his hand on mine. It was a small gesture, but it meant everything. The warmth of his touch sent a shiver through me, and I fought to keep my composure. I can't give you all the answers, he said softly. But we can figure this out together. The first step is being honest with ourselves, and with the people we care about. It won't be easy. But it's the only way forward. The weight of his words settled over me like a heavy blanket. I wanted to argue, to tell him that it wasn't that simple, that everything was more complicated than that. But I knew he was right. The only way forward was through honesty. The only way forward was to face the truth of what we had done. I don't want to lose you, I said quietly, my voice breaking. But I don't know if I can keep living like this. I don't know how to fix everything. He squeezed my hand gently, his gaze never leaving mine. We don't have to fix everything right away. We just have to start. I nodded, swallowing hard. The road ahead would be long, and it would be painful. But I knew, deep down, that it was the only path left. The choices I had made had led me here, to this moment, and there was no turning back now. As I sat there, holding his hand, I realized that I had no idea what the future held. But for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was finally facing the truth. And that, I knew, was the first step toward finding my way out of the mess I had created. The next few days were a blur, filled with the quiet hum of a life that seemed to be unfolding in ways I hadn't planned or expected. Every moment was heavy with meaning, as if each action, each word, had consequences I wasn't fully prepared to face. I knew, deep down, that I couldn't ignore this any longer, but at the same time, I couldn't seem to stop myself from sinking deeper into it. I kept replaying our conversation in my mind, over and over, like a record stuck on a loop. His words, the calm, reassuring tone he had used when he told me we didn't have to fix everything right away, echoed in my thoughts, but they didn't bring me comfort. Instead, they reminded me of how much I had already lost. I had already crossed a line I could never uncross, and now there was no going back. The truth had been laid bare between us, and nothing would ever be the same again. I was caught between two worlds, the one I had known, the one I had built with my husband, and the one that was beginning to form with my father-in-law. The guilt gnawed at me, but there was also something else, something I couldn't deny. There was a pull between us that was undeniable. He had become someone I could talk to, someone who saw me, really saw me, in a way I hadn't felt in years. I knew I should distance myself, that I should find a way to put an end to this before it got any more complicated. But every time I tried, I felt the weight of my own loneliness, the void that seemed to grow wider with each passing day. I had been waiting for something, anything, to make me feel alive again. And somehow, in the midst of all this confusion, I found it. The next time he called, I didn't hesitate to answer. His voice was familiar, soothing, and even though I knew I should stay away, I couldn't bring myself to shut him out. I couldn't ignore the comfort he offered, the sense of belonging that I had been craving. "I've been thinking about you," he said, his voice soft, almost tentative. "I don't want you to feel like you have to make a decision right away. We can take things slow. But I think we both know something's changed." I swallowed hard, feeling the weight of his words settle in my chest. I didn't know how to respond. I didn't know what I wanted, what I was supposed to want. Part of me wanted to walk away, to retreat into the safety of my life with my husband, to bury these feelings and pretend like everything was fine. But the other part of me, the part that had been starved for attention, for connection, wanted to give in, to explore whatever this was between us. "I don't know what's happening," I whispered. "But I can't pretend it's not." He was silent for a moment, and when he spoke again, his words were calm, but firm. "You don't have to pretend with me. You don't have to be anyone other than who you are." His words, though gentle, carried a weight that I wasn't sure I could bear. "But I'm married," I said, my voice barely audible. "I know," he replied, his voice low. "And I'm not asking you to make any decisions right now. I'm just saying that I'm here. And I'm not going anywhere." The sincerity in his voice made my chest tighten. I wanted to pull away, to push him out of my life before things got any more complicated, but I couldn't. I was already too far gone. "I don't know what to do," I admitted, my voice shaking. "I don't know what I want." "You don't have to know," he said softly. "You just have to take it one step at a time. I'm here for you, no matter what." His words, his presence, made me feel like I wasn't alone in this. I hadn't realized how much I had been starving for someone to just be there, to listen, to understand. I hadn't realized how much I had been holding on to a marriage that had long since lost its spark, hoping that things would get better on their own. But now, with him, things felt different. I wasn't sure if that was a good thing or a bad thing, but I couldn't deny that I had never felt more seen, more understood. And I didn't know how to stop. As the days passed, I found myself drawn to him more and more. The quiet phone calls, the moments when he would reach out, checking in on me, asking how I was doing, they became the highlight of my days. Each conversation felt like a small reprieve from the loneliness I had been living in for so long. And with each passing day, the connection between us grew stronger. I knew that I couldn't keep living like this. I couldn't keep pretending that everything was fine, that my marriage was fine, that my life was fine. But I didn't know how to stop what was happening between us, either. I kept trying to tell myself that I was being foolish, that I should just end it, walk away, and never look back. But I couldn't. The truth was, I didn't want to walk away. I didn't want to give up on the one thing that had made me feel alive again. And yet, every time I thought about my husband, the guilt would rise up inside me, heavy and suffocating. I couldn't ignore what I had done. I couldn't pretend that I wasn't betraying him, that I wasn't playing with fire. But no matter how much I tried to fight it, the feelings I had for my father-in-law didn't go away. They only grew stronger. I spent the next few days trying to distract myself, to focus on something else, anything else. But every time I looked at my phone, every time I thought about the conversations we had shared, the longing I felt for him would rise to the surface. I couldn't stop myself. And the more I tried to push it away, the more it consumed me. That evening, I found myself standing at his door again, my heart pounding in my chest. I hadn't planned to come here. I hadn't told him I was coming. But I couldn't stop myself. I knocked before I could talk myself out of it. When he opened the door, there was a quiet understanding in his eyes. He didn't say anything at first, he just stepped aside, letting me in. And for a moment, we stood there, silent, the weight of everything hanging between us. I shouldn't be here, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. But he didn't respond right away. Instead, he took a step closer to me, his presence overwhelming in the small space. "You don't have to explain yourself," he said softly. "I'm not asking you to." And in that moment, everything inside me seemed to stop. There was no judgment in his eyes, no pressure, just a quiet understanding that made my chest tighten. I wasn't ready to make any decisions, but I knew one thing: I couldn't keep running from this. "I don't know what to do," I said again, my voice breaking. "But I can't stop." He didn't answer. He didn't need to. His hand reached out, gently touching my arm, and in that moment, I realized that I wasn't alone anymore. I wasn't invisible. And that, more than anything, was both terrifying and comforting at the same time. The days that followed felt like I was walking through a fog. Everything seemed muted, like the world was moving around me while I stood still, caught in a place I didn't know how to navigate. My mind was a constant whirlwind, filled with confusion, guilt, and longing. I didn't know what I was doing anymore. All I knew was that every time I tried to pull away, the pull toward him, toward the connection we had, only grew stronger. The guilt didn't fade. It grew sharper with every passing day. I found myself looking at my husband, trying to remember the man I had married, but it felt like I was seeing a stranger. Our marriage, once full of warmth and understanding, had become a distant memory. I had spent so long holding on to something that was no longer there. And now, I was faced with the consequences of my actions. But despite the weight of my guilt, I couldn't help but seek him out. I couldn't ignore the way he made me feel, the way his presence gave me a sense of belonging that I had been craving for years. Every conversation, every moment spent with him, felt like an escape from the emptiness that had consumed me. I couldn't stop myself. I didn't know if I wanted to. The phone calls became more frequent. At first, I had tried to limit them, tried to convince myself that I was only talking to him because I needed someone to listen, but the truth was harder to ignore. Every time he spoke to me, I felt a connection that I couldn't explain. He understood me in a way that my husband never had, and that realization terrified me. I wasn't sure if I could go back to the way things were, to a life of silence and unspoken feelings. It wasn't just about the attention he gave me, it was about something deeper. It was the way he saw me, really saw me. In his eyes, I wasn't just a wife, a mother, or a caretaker. I was a person, a woman, someone worth paying attention to. And that made it impossible to ignore the growing feelings inside of me. The phone rang again one evening. I saw his name on the screen, and for a moment, I hesitated. My heart beat faster as I wondered if I was making a mistake by continuing down this path. But I answered it anyway, unable to resist the pull. "Hello?" I said, my voice shaking just slightly. "Hi," he said softly. "How are you doing?" It was the same question, the same concern, but it felt different this time. I could hear the sincerity in his voice, and it made my chest tighten. I didn't want to answer. I didn't want to admit how lost I felt. But I couldn't keep pretending anymore. "I don't know," I said quietly. "I don't know what's happening to me." He paused for a moment, his silence speaking volumes. I knew he understood. He always did. You don't have to know right now, he said. We'll take it slow. Just let yourself breathe for a moment. I closed my eyes, leaning back against the wall. I could feel the tears welling up, but I didn't let them fall. I couldn't. Not yet. I just don't know what to do, I whispered. Everything feels like it's falling apart. He didn't respond right away. Instead, there was a long pause. I felt his presence through the phone, a steady reassurance that somehow made everything seem a little less overwhelming. You don't have to fix everything at once, he finally said. You just have to take one step at a time. You're not alone in this. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe that I wasn't alone, but the truth was, I didn't know how to move forward. I didn't know if I could fix what I had broken, if I could undo the damage I had done. But the more I talked to him, the more I realized that I wasn't the same person I had been before. I couldn't go back. The next few days passed in a haze. My husband remained distant, wrapped up in his own world, and I found myself pulling further away from him. I didn't know how to talk to him anymore. The silence between us felt suffocating, and I couldn't bring myself to break it. And then, it happened. It was a Friday evening when my husband finally came to me. We hadn't spoken much in the last week, but I could tell that something was different in the air. His eyes were searching, studying me, as if trying to figure out what had changed. I felt the tension in the room as he opened his mouth to speak. We need to talk, he said, his voice tense. I nodded, unsure of what to expect. I don't know what's been going on with you, he began. But I can feel that something's off. We've been drifting apart, and I don't know how to fix it. I've been so wrapped up in my own work that I didn't even realize how much you've been hurting. His words hit me like a punch to the gut. It wasn't that I hadn't heard them before, but now, in this moment, they felt different. They felt too late. I don't know how to fix it either, I whispered, my voice breaking. I don't know if I can. He reached for me, his hand trembling as he gently cupped my face. We can't keep going like this, he said, his voice softening. I don't want to lose you. The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. And in that moment, I realized the depth of what I had been doing. The depth of what I had already lost. I'm sorry, I said, tears filling my eyes. I didn't mean for any of this to happen. I never wanted to hurt you. He closed his eyes, a deep sigh escaping from his lips. I know, he said quietly. But the damage is done. And now we have to figure out what happens next. We sat there in silence for a long time, neither of us knowing what to say. The truth had finally come to light, and now it was too late to pretend it didn't exist. The guilt, the confusion, the fear, it was all there, woven into the fabric of our lives. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know if there was a way to fix what had been broken. But I knew that I couldn't continue living in this limbo, torn between two worlds. I had made my choices, and now, I had to live with them. I don't know where we go from here, I whispered, the weight of it all settling in. And in that moment, I realized that I couldn't keep pretending anymore. I couldn't keep hiding from the truth. Whatever happened next, it would be up to me to decide. But the path ahead was uncertain, and I didn't know if I was ready for what it might bring. I wasn't sure how much time had passed when I finally broke the silence. The house was still, the only sound the distant hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of the floorboards beneath us. I was sitting on the couch, my legs curled beneath me, eyes staring out the window as the last light of the day faded into night. My husband sat across from me, his face unreadable, the tension thick between us. We hadn't spoken much since our last conversation. There were no harsh words, no shouting. Just silence. It was the kind of silence that made everything feel worse, as if we were both trying to pretend that nothing had changed when, in reality, everything had. I knew I had to make a decision, but the weight of it all was suffocating. What could I do? What could I say? The life I had built, the marriage I had once believed in, was no longer the same. And yet, I couldn't bring myself to make the final move, to admit that I had gone too far, that I had crossed a line that I couldn't come back from. "You haven't been the same," my husband said, his voice breaking the silence like a knife. It wasn't an accusation, but it felt like one. There was a sadness in his tone, a quiet realization that I wasn't the woman he had married anymore. The weight of those words hit me harder than I expected. I had known, deep down, that things were changing. But hearing it out loud, from him, made it all too real. "I know," I whispered, my voice barely audible. I didn't look at him, couldn't bring myself to. I could feel the tears building up behind my eyes, but I forced them back. I didn't want to cry. I didn't want to break down in front of him. Not now. Not when I had already ruined everything. "I don't know what happened," he continued, his voice softer now, almost defeated. "You've been distant for so long. I've tried, but it's like you've already checked out. I don't know how to fix it. I don't even know where to start." His words hung in the air between us, and I felt a deep ache in my chest. I wanted to explain, to tell him everything, but the truth seemed too heavy to bear. How could I tell him that the love we had was no longer enough? That I had been drowning in a marriage that had become a shadow of what it once was, and I hadn't known how to escape it until now? "I'm sorry," I finally managed to say. The words felt empty, like they meant nothing anymore. What could my apology do? What could I say to make it right? "You've said that before," he replied, his voice thick with frustration. "But nothing changes. Nothing ever changes." His words stung, and I felt a pang of guilt that cut deeper than anything else. He was right. I had said I was sorry, but it hadn't been enough. I hadn't done anything to change, to fix the things that had been broken for so long. I could feel the weight of the decision pressing down on me, the realization that I was at a crossroads. I couldn't keep living like this. But what was I supposed to do? What was I supposed to choose? "I don't know if I can fix this," I said, my voice trembling. "I don't know if it's even possible." He looked at me then, really looked at me, and for the first time in a long time, I saw the hurt in his eyes. The hurt that I had caused, that I had been too blind to see. The silence between us stretched on, thick and suffocating. "I don't want to lose you," he whispered, his voice raw. The vulnerability in his words made my heart twist, but it also made the decision feel even harder. How could I tell him that I had already lost myself? That I had already made my choice, even if I wasn't ready to admit it yet? "I don't want to lose you either," I replied, my voice barely a whisper. The words felt hollow, because I wasn't sure what they meant anymore. Did I want to stay? Did I want to fight for this, for him, for us? Or had I already given up, without even realizing it? "I think we both need space," I said after a long pause, the words escaping before I could stop them. The weight of them was heavier than I expected. "I think I need to figure out what I want." He nodded slowly, his face a mixture of resignation and sadness. "I think that's for the best." I stood up, the room feeling smaller somehow, the walls closing in around me. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know where to go from here. But I couldn't stay in this limbo anymore. I couldn't keep pretending that everything was fine when it wasn't. "I'll give you the space you need," he said quietly, his eyes never leaving mine. "But I don't know what comes next." Neither did I. I didn't know what was next for us, for me, for the life I had built. All I knew was that I couldn't keep pretending that I was the same person I had been before. The weight of the truth that I had been hiding from for so long, had finally caught up with me, and I wasn't sure how to carry it anymore. I don't either, I whispered, my voice barely audible. I just don't know. The silence that followed was deafening, but it was the silence I needed. The silence that allowed me to breathe, to finally face the truth of what I had done. There was no more pretending, no more hiding. It was time to face the consequences of my actions, and I wasn't sure I was ready. But I had no choice. As I walked out of the room, the weight of my decision settled in. I didn't know where this path would lead, but I knew one thing for certain: nothing would ever be the same again. The days after our conversation seemed to stretch out endlessly. I couldn't remember the last time time felt so heavy, like it was pressing down on me, forcing me to make decisions I wasn't ready to face. My husband and I barely spoke. The silence between us had grown thick, suffocating in its own way. It was a silence that didn't offer comfort, only confusion and uncertainty. I spent most of my time at home, retreating into myself. I couldn't bring myself to go out or see anyone. What was I supposed to say? How could I explain this thing that had blossomed between us? This thing that was so wrong but felt so right? Every time I tried to talk to my husband, the words wouldn't come. They got caught in my throat, tangled in the web of guilt and fear that had built up inside me. How could I explain to him that I wasn't the same person anymore? That I had changed, not just in small ways, but in ways that went to the very core of who I was? I found myself thinking about the future, about what was next for me. I had been running for so long, chasing something I couldn't even define, and now, it felt like I had run straight into a wall. There was no way around it. I couldn't keep pretending that everything would magically go back to the way it was before. I had made choices. I had crossed a line. The phone calls with him continued, each one pulling me further into a world I wasn't sure I was ready to inhabit. Every conversation felt like a lifeline, even though I knew it was only making things worse. I had no answers, no solutions. I only had more questions, and more uncertainty. And yet, despite everything, I couldn't stop myself from seeking him out. He was there for me in a way my husband hadn't been for so long. The way he listened to me, the way he understood my silence, was something I had craved for years. Every word he said felt like a balm on my wounds, soothing the parts of me that had been neglected for so long. I didn't know how to navigate this, how to handle these feelings that had started to consume me. But every time he called, every time he reached out, I felt like maybe, just maybe, I wasn't as lost as I thought. I found myself replaying our conversations in my head, over and over again. The way his voice sounded when he said he was there for me. The way he said we would figure it out together, as if it was possible to fix everything that had gone wrong. The hope in his voice made me feel something I hadn't felt in a long time, hope that maybe I could find a way to put the pieces of my life back together, even if it was just for a moment. But the guilt never stopped. It was a constant companion, lurking in the back of my mind, reminding me of what I had done. I knew I couldn't keep living this way. I couldn't keep pretending that I wasn't deeply affected by everything that had happened. The decisions I had made had consequences, and I couldn't escape them. But every time I tried to walk away, every time I thought about putting an end to this, I felt the pull of something deeper, something I couldn't ignore. I was sitting in the living room one afternoon when my husband came home. I had been staring blankly at the television, not really watching anything. It had been a long day, filled with nothing but my own thoughts. When he walked in, I didn't immediately look up. I couldn't. I didn't know how to face him anymore. "Hey," he said, his voice hesitant, as if unsure of how to approach me. I didn't respond at first. My mind was too full, too clouded with everything that had happened, with everything I had been hiding. I could feel him watching me, waiting for me to say something. But I couldn't. The words wouldn't come. He sat down next to me, and for a long time, neither of us spoke. The silence stretched between us, thick and suffocating. It was the kind of silence that made everything feel worse, as if the words we needed to say were trapped somewhere between us, unable to break free. "I don't know what's happening between us," he finally said, his voice low. "But I can feel it. You're not the same. You're not here, not really." His words hit me like a punch. I wanted to argue, to tell him that he was wrong, that everything was fine. But I knew he was right. I wasn't the same. How could I be? I had changed, and not in small ways. I had made choices that I couldn't take back, and now they were tearing me apart. "I know," I whispered, the words barely escaping my lips. "I'm sorry. I don't know what to do anymore. I don't know how to fix this," he said, his voice thick with frustration. I've been trying to figure out what's going on, but nothing changes. I don't know who you are anymore." His words stung. They were true, but they stung all the same. How could I explain to him that I wasn't sure who I was anymore either? That I didn't know how to find my way back to the person I used to be? "I don't know who I am anymore either," I whispered, tears welling up in my eyes. "But I can't keep pretending." The words felt like a confession, a release of everything I had been hiding. It was the first time I had said it out loud. I had been pretending for so long, pretending that everything was fine, pretending that I could fix it, but I couldn't anymore. I couldn't keep living a lie. He didn't say anything for a long time. He just sat there, staring at the floor, as if trying to process everything that had just happened. I could see the hurt in his eyes, the betrayal. I had hurt him, and I didn't know how to make it right. "I think we need time," he said finally, his voice quiet, almost resigned. "I think we need some space. I don't know what's going to happen, but I can't keep pretending either." The words hit me harder than I expected. I had been afraid of this moment, afraid that we would come to this point, but hearing it out loud made it real. We were falling apart. And I didn't know how to stop it. I nodded, unable to find the words to say anything else. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know how to fix this. The life I had known, the life I had tried so hard to hold together, was slipping through my fingers, and I didn't know how to catch it. As he left the room, I sat there, feeling the weight of the decision we had both made. I had crossed a line, and now I had to live with the consequences. But what were those consequences? What would my life look like now? I didn't know. And as I sat there, alone in the silence, I realized that maybe the hardest part wasn't making the decision. It was living with it.